two black boxes. That's what this case has come down to. One is a boat that sat still in the water off a Mississippi barrier island for 5.5 hours, and nobody in power has fully explained why. The other is a phone, recovered by a mother who used a tracking app to find her son's last connection to the world, that came back to her with almost nothing on it from the day he disappeared. Two silences, running side by side, and a family now fighting through the courts to force them both open. This is where the Nolan Wells case stands right now. The core facts of what happened to Nolan Wells haven't changed since his body was recovered off Horn Island. What's changed is how much more we now know about the hours and days that followed, because of records that have been forced into public view one at a time. GPS data, preliminary law enforcement documents, an independent autopsy, enhanced audio, subpoenas. Each one has added a piece, and each one has also added a new dispute. Right now, 3 parallel fights are happening. The Wells family, through attorney Ben Crump and Mississippi attorney Gary Bufkin, is trying to force major tech companies to hand over data from Nolan's accounts. A second separate agreement is in place for a joint forensic look at his actual phone, shared between the family's experts and law enforcement. And underneath both of those, an independent autopsy has already come back, and it raised more questions than it answered. None of these threads have resolved. That's the story right now. Not an ending, but a set of open investigations moving at the same time, each one capable of changing what we think we know. Start with the boat, because it's the clearest hard data we have, and it's also the least explained. According to GPS records from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, obtained separately by ABC News and CBS News, the boat that carried Nolan and his friends left a private dock at 9:56 in the morning on July 4th. It arrived at Horn Island at 11:14. From that point, the data shows the boat as stationary, not moving, parked at the island for 5.5 hours. At 4:31 in the afternoon, the boat left the island. And here's where the data gets strange. For the first 3 miles, it moved at no more than 4.2 knots. That's barely faster than a walking pace on water. Then, at 5:25, the boat suddenly returns to normal operating speed, somewhere between 30 and 35 knots, and makes it back to the original dock about 20 minutes later. The friends on board say there's a simple explanation for the slow crawl. The boat was taking on water. A bilge pump problem, they say, forced them to leave the island in a hurry and limp back towards shore, before whatever repair or bailing they did let them speed back up. That account lines up, at least in timing, with what the GPS shows. What the GPS can't tell you is what happened on the island during those 5.5 stationary hours, or in the roughly 90 minutes between Nolan's last confirmed sighting, around 3 in the afternoon, and the moment the boat pulled away without him. Attorney Ben Crump's office has said Nolan was last seen on the island around 3 p.m. The boat left at 4:31. That's the actual window investigators and the public are trying to account for. Not the full 5.5 hours the boat sat still, but that final stretch and what took place in it. Friends who were there say that when they left, Nolan chose to stay behind, and that he was in the company of a young woman they didn't know. They say they didn't abandon him. They say the water emergency forced their hand, and that Nolan made his own decision to remain and find another way back later. That account has been consistent across multiple friends' statements to reporters. Nolan's parents don't buy it. His father, Elmore Wansley, has said publicly that his son simply wasn't the type to separate from a group he arrived with. He's described teaching Nolan that if you go somewhere with people, you come back with those same people. To the family, an 18-year-old choosing to stay alone on a barrier island without his phone, without a way to reach the mainland, doesn't square with who they say their son was. The GPS data doesn't settle that disagreement. It confirms a timeline. It doesn't confirm intent, and it doesn't explain what filled those final 90 minutes before the boat left. That's the boat's black box, and it's still closed. The second black box is smaller, but in some ways it's stranger because, unlike the boat, this one involves data that should still exist somewhere on servers that haven't been searched yet. Nolan's phone stayed behind on the island, or on the boat, depending on whose account you follow. What's not fully clear, according to ABC News, is exactly who had possession of that phone in the days between July 4th and July 10th. What we do know is that Nolan's mother, Christine Wansley, used the location tracking app Life 360 to find the device and recovered it with help from a friend on the evening of July 4th. When she finally got the phone in her hands, she and her sister went through it. Specifically, they checked Nolan's Snapchat. He had 2 accounts, and according to Christine, there was nothing there. No photos, no videos, nothing from the trip. That absence is what she's called suspicious. In her words, Snapchat content typically stays visible for about 24 hours, and there was nothing from that window at all. She's also said she cross-referenced the location history Life 360 had logged for Nolan's phone against what Snapchat's own location data showed, and that the 2 didn't match up. Here's the important distinction, and it matters. None of this has been forensically confirmed as deletion. What Christine Wansley is describing is an absence she found suspicious, not a proven finding that content was removed. That's actually the entire reason the next step in this case exists. If the family already had proof of deletion, they wouldn't need subpoenas. The fact that they're fighting in court to get this data from the platforms themselves tells you this is still an open question, not a settled one. One of Nolan's friends, Warren Hudson, has publicly denied any involvement. In an interview, he said flatly that he never touched Nolan's phone, that he didn't know the passcode, and that he had no reason to look through it. He's also offered an explanation for why multiple people's phones ended up separated from their owners that day. He says several people in the group left their phones on the boat to protect them once it started taking on water, and that the phones were later moved into a truck. When a friend's mother arrived and asked for Nolan's device, Hudson says someone in the group handed it over without any pushback. So you have 2 threads that don't cancel each other out, but don't fully resolve each other either. A mother who compared 2 sets of location data and found a mismatch. A friend who denies touching the phone and offers an ordinary explanation for why it ended up away from its owner. Both of those things can be true at the same time, and the only way to know what actually happened to the phone's data is to get inside the platforms that generated it, which brings us to where this case has physically moved into a courtroom. On July 28th, attorney Gary Bufkin, working alongside Ben Crump's team, filed subpoenas in Mississippi State Chancery Court targeting 6 accounts tied to Nolan Wells: Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, which are all owned by Meta, Snapchat, TikTok, and Life 360, the location tracking app. The requests are broad. They're asking for current and former usernames, email addresses, phone numbers, and display names tied to the accounts. They want the IP addresses used to create and log into each account, along with login histories and password reset records. They're asking for messages, photos, videos, posts, and stories. And they want records that could identify anyone who exchanged messages with Nolan, including IP addresses tied to friend connections on these platforms. In plain terms, the family isn't just trying to recover what might be missing. They're trying to build a complete digital timeline of Nolan's final hours, one that doesn't depend on any single person's phone or memory. Each company has 21 days from being served to comply. This isn't the only data fight happening. Separately and earlier, Nolan's family and the Jackson County District Attorney's Office agreed to something a law professor interviewed about the case described as unusual: a joint forensic inspection of Nolan's actual physical phone. Both the family's experts and law enforcement's experts get to review the extraction together at the same time. Typically, evidence like this stays fully in the hands of investigators. A shared, simultaneous review is not how these cases usually go, according to that law professor, though he also noted the cooperation could ultimately help the investigation move faster. So right now, there are 2 separate efforts pulling on the same thread. One is about the physical device. One is about the digital footprint sitting on servers owned by 6 different companies. Neither has produced results yet. Both are running on the clock. Now, the part of this story that's traveled the fastest, and also the part most likely to get flattened into something it isn't. A preliminary document from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, an email sent July 5th as part of the search effort, told search crews that witnesses described Nolan as having been drinking heavily. That document was obtained and first reported by ABC News, and other outlets picked it up quickly from there. Here's what needs to be said clearly. This is a witness account inside a preliminary search document. It is not a toxicology report. The state's official toxicology results have not been released. Nobody has confirmed a blood alcohol level publicly through an official channel, and the claim hasn't gone unchallenged. A member of the volunteer search team that helped recover Nolan's body has pushed back directly. His account, given publicly, was that his understanding is Nolan's blood alcohol level was not actually at an intoxicated level, even though there were photos circulating of the group drinking that day. That's one person's account, just like the original claim is built on other people's accounts. Neither has been confirmed by an official toxicology report. So what you actually have is two competing witness impressions sitting on either side of a document that was never meant to be a final word on anything. It was a working search and rescue email, not a scientific finding. Until toxicology comes back from the state, that's exactly where this claim sits. Disputed, unresolved, and not proof of anything about what ultimately happened to Nolan. Because the family had concerns about transparency early on, they commissioned their own independent autopsy, separate from the state's. It was conducted by Dr. Roger Mitchell, a forensic pathologist and the chair of pathology at Howard University College of Medicine. His preliminary report was made public in late July. The headline finding is simple to state and hard to interpret. Cause and manner of death remain undetermined. That's not a dodge. It's what the pathologist could actually conclude given what he had to work with. Two details from that report are worth sitting with. First, during a layered dissection of the back of Nolan's neck and skull, Dr. Mitchell found a 12 by 8 inch area of red discoloration in the deep, soft tissue over the occipital bone, the bone at the base of the skull. There was no laceration on the skin above it and no fracture underneath it. Because the body had significantly decomposed by the time it reached him for a second examination, Mitchell said he couldn't determine whether that discoloration came from an injury at or near the time of death, but he flagged it in his report as something significant enough to warrant further investigation. Not a conclusion, a flag. Second, when the body arrived for this second autopsy, several structures from the front of the neck were missing. The trachea, the laryngeal cartilage, the thyroid horn, the hyoid bone. Without those structures, Dr. Mitchell said he could not rule out an injury to the front of the neck because he simply didn't have the material to examine. It's worth being fair here. Mitchell himself noted that pathologists sometimes retain neck structures after a first autopsy, specifically to examine them further, particularly when there's any concern about neck fractures or compression. He did not claim their absence represented wrongdoing. He said he didn't know why they were held back in this case, only that their absence limited what he could determine. Layered on top of that, because this wasn't the first look at the body, Mitchell couldn't directly examine the airway and lungs for water, couldn't check the stomach for contents or gas that might indicate what happened before death, and couldn't observe the condition of the body at the moment it was pulled from the water. Every one of those limitations narrows what conclusions are possible right now. So not a finding of foul play, not a finding of an accident either. A report that says, honestly, there isn't enough here yet to say for certain how Nolan Wells died, and that at least one specific finding, the discoloration at the back of his head, deserves more scrutiny before this case is closed in anyone's mind. If you've spent any time near this story online, you've probably run into a piece of audio that's caused an enormous amount of noise, some of it useful, most of it not. The recording itself isn't new or mysterious in origin. It's the emergency call one of Nolan's friends placed to Sea Tow, a private towing company, around 4 in the afternoon on July 4th, right as the group's boat was taking on water near the island. In the original recording, the caller reports the bilge pump has failed and the boat is sinking, and struggles to answer basic questions from the dispatcher about how many people are on board and how fast the water is rising. What turned this into a viral flashpoint was an enhanced version. An audio engineer took the original recording and cleaned it up, adding her own subtitles for what she believed she could hear in the background. According to that enhanced version, and according to TMZ's reporting on it, some listeners believe they can make out phrases like, "Is he dead?" Nolan's name, "Check his chest," and "Wake up," buried under the panic of the original call. To be direct about this, none of those interpretations have been confirmed by anyone with authority to confirm them, and they've been directly challenged. A digital forensics expert named Robert Fried reviewed both the original recording and the enhanced versions side by side. He found that the enhanced version TMZ published runs 20 seconds longer than the original and carries a different digital fingerprint entirely. When his team ran their own transcription process on both versions, they could not corroborate the specific phrases people believe they're hearing. His conclusion wasn't that nothing is there, it was that the audio is distorted enough on both versions that confident claims about specific words being said go further than the evidence supports. This matters because of how fast the online reaction moved. People built entire theories on background noise from a stress call about a sinking boat, made by frightened teenagers trying to get help before any expert had weighed in. That doesn't mean the audio is meaningless. It means it's unverified, and it should be treated that way until someone with the right tools and the right authority says otherwise. One more piece of this story has stayed murky since the earliest reports. The identity of the young woman Nolan's friends say he was with when they left the island. That preliminary marine resources document referred to her only as an unknown female. Since then, reporting has identified her as Katie McCormack. But this identification hasn't gone unchallenged either. Her sister has publicly disputed the way this has been framed, saying the two only spoke briefly that day and that the family has fully cooperated with investigators throughout. So here's where that stands. A name has surfaced in coverage, but the people closest to that name are pushing back on what role is being assigned to her in the public version of events. Until investigators say more, or she speaks for herself, that's a claim that deserves the same caution as everything else in this case that hasn't been independently confirmed. As this case has grown into a national story, it's also grown uglier in ways that have nothing to do with finding out what happened to Nolan. The FBI's Jackson office has confirmed it's assisting the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, describing it as a normal partnership, especially given that Horn Island itself sits on federal land. But the FBI has also confirmed something more troubling. It's actively working to address what it calls interstate threats made against individuals connected to this case. That's not limited to Nolan's parents, although Christine Wansley has said she believes she's received threats as well. Nolan's friend Tristan Shepard has said publicly that he and others in the friend group have received threats and harassment online as this story spread, saying he doesn't understand the hatred directed at people who, in his words, did nothing wrong and loved a Nolan. Separately, a Jackson County judge, who is the stepmother of one of the young men who was on the boat that day, has said on social media that her family has received a wave of death threats as well. Underneath all of that, the actual investigation keeps moving forward on its own track. Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath has committed to eventually presenting this case to a grand jury once the investigation is complete. That's a standard step for unexplained deaths in the county, not an indication of where the case is heading. It simply means that, in time, all the evidence gathered, from the GPS data to the subpoena results to both autopsies, will be laid out for a jury to weigh. So where does that leave things? 2 black boxes are still sealed. Nobody has fully explained what happened on Horn Island in the final 90 minutes before that boat pulled away without Nolan Wells. Nobody has fully explained why his Snapchat came back empty, or whether that emptiness means anything at all. The people equipped to answer both of those questions, whether that's investigators reviewing GPS logs more closely, or 6 tech companies preparing to respond to subpoenas within 21 days, are still working. The independent autopsy raised a flag on unexplained discoloration and admitted its own limits. The state's own toxicology and autopsy results still haven't been made public. The audio that set off a wave of theories has been challenged by the very kind of expert analysis this case actually needs more of, not less. What's left is a family trying to force open 2 silences at once, using the only tools available to them: subpoenas, an independent pathologist, and a demand for a full joint accounting of the evidence. Whether either black box actually opens, and what's inside if it does, is still an open question. We'll be watching it, and when there's a real update, we'll bring it to you. If this kind of case coverage is useful to you, please consider subscribing so you don't miss it when the next update comes. A final note before we go. Everything in this video reflects reporting available as of the time this was made. This is an active investigation. Details can change, claims can be confirmed or disproven, and some individuals named here have not been charged with anything and are presumed to have told the truth about their own conduct unless and until evidence says otherwise. We'll continue to follow this story as it develops and will correct the record if the facts change.